set largely in the private sector. And the people that can help, the farmers and workers don't actually get to be at the table in much of that standard setting, and I would argue a lot of consumers aren't either. And so we also have powers accumulated in access to markets, and this is really critical for farmers. It's also critical for consumers. But I think also the big elephant in the room that we're not talking about too is access to capital, and how capital is really the name of the game, and how capital plays out in the food industry, I think is really important. Bob Taylor from Auburn has done some really interesting research on return on investment, which is, of course, return on investment is really return on capital. It's a much better way to gauge what's happening in the food system for farmers, for producers, than some of the other things we've been talking about. And farmers haven't done very well in that. So let's talk about consumers for a minute. Access. Kyle started to talk about rural areas. But I think that the power is translated into some entities have the ability to impose their business models on others, and these business models have really left out rural areas, and they've left out inner urban areas quite frequently. I'll give you an example of my hometown of Shelanski, Nebraska, population of 350 people. There is still a grocery store in that town, but it's hard for them to get deliveries because of the restructuring, the consolidation that's happened in the grocery industry and the restructuring that's happened among distributors. It's really hard for them to get deliveries. My 80-year-old mother is spry enough to go drive. Others can't. So what happens if they go out of business? But the same situation exists in Old North St. Louis, within view of the Arch. And folks there, it's at least 3 miles, many without cars, to grocery stores, and they live in a food desert. The quality of things that they can get in Old North, the quality of things that we can get in my hometown of Shelanski are vastly different. And a lot of this is due to the restructuring of what's happened in the grocery industry. And I think those are really important things to point out. And think about power in much broader terms in impacting people on the ground. Producers, labor, consumer on the ground. It's not just about prices.
Okay, Erik, you represent the large retailers. Do you have a perspective on this as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again for giving me the opportunity to participate. There's no question that the marketplace has changed dramatically in the past several decades. 30 or 40 years ago, consumers pretty much had to purchase all of their groceries at conventional supermarkets, but today the marketplace is much more diversified. Shoppers can purchase items through so many more retail channels now. We have supercenters, warehouse club stores, limited assortment stores, convenience stores, chain drug stores, natural and organic stores, and even online retailers are now selling groceries. And all of these retail channels are competing vigorously with one another. Competition is extremely robust. I would say it's more robust than it was back in those days. And this is resulting in low prices for consumers and more convenience too. Many stores are open 24 hours, and the variety of items that are carried in stores has expanded. And there's not only competition on price, there's very vigorous competition on services now too. More stores are offering prepared foods. This provides value to the consumer. It saves them time. Sushi, gourmet bakeries, and top-notch delis are more commonplace. Stores are even offering cooking classes, wine tastings, flower arranging classes, and dietitians on site. And our latest poll found that store satisfaction is rising, and 9 out of 10 shoppers would recommend a commerce store.
So they're offering more, and I guess to Mary's point, the question is, where are those stores? And Wenonah, do you have anything you want to add to this as well from your perspective?
Yes, absolutely. Well, supermarkets exert power over consumers based on location. And so consumers have to spend their time and their travel dollars to get to the store. Research has shown that women spend twice as much time shopping as men, and women often also have a job outside their home. So they don't have time to travel around to different stores to get the best deal. And probably at least 60% of Americans don't have an iPhone with an app on it to find the best deal. Really interesting information from some studies on rural nutrition, which show that, as we would think, in these food deserts, we have this illusion of choice, and grocery stores present this illusion by having many, many similar products sold by only this handful of companies. So there may be 50 kinds of potato chips, but 75% are sold by the top 4 firms. Or there are enough kids' cereals to take up a whole aisle, but they're sold by the same 4 companies. So this gives the illusion of choice, but what's actually happening is that the food and retailing industry is largely their marketing machines, and they often target children, which is really contributing to the epidemic of childhood obesity with all these marketing tie-ins. So foods are targeted at children by placing them at eye level, and then they're cross-marketed with cartoon or movie characters that kids recognize. And a recent Yale study found that the number of products with these commercial tie-ins to other kid-friendly products increased 78% between 2006 and 2008. And then I guess the other elephant in the room is what is the food that's actually being sold? And I think that Dr. David Kessler, who is the former Surgeon General, had some very important points about this in his book, The End of Overeating. He basically documented that the food industry scientists have developed this formula that is based on sugar, fat, and salt that alters the brain's chemistry and compels people to overeat. And grocery stores, along with the food processors, have every incentive to sell this highly processed food because that's the most profit-making, those are the most profit-making items. And then I guess I would have one more point around concentration in food safety. When there are only a few companies that are providing the ingredients for the entire food system, we have a real problem. So, we've seen it with the egg factory and the salmonella outbreak. We've seen it with peanut butter. Peanut butters or peanuts are in all sorts of products, and so it ends up destroying all sorts of food items and poisoning people. And as others have noted, many of the food companies and the farm marketers have merged in part because they're responding from the pressure from the big supermarket chains. So we've seen this kind of consolidation in these other food products that comprise the processed foods that we eat. So we have 2 firms, for instance, that control all of bagged leafy greens, and they're mostly produced in 2 counties in California. So when there is an E. coli problem in spinach, it means that most spinach has to be pulled off the grocery store shelves. These are the impacts that aren't generally, that people, even consumers, aren't generally aware of.
I'd like to turn to you now and talk a little bit about the internet. I knew we definitely need to hear from you. We wanted to, we discussed the technology. We've heard concentration, we've heard some of the suggested impacts from that concentration in grocery stores and other food retailers. But I'd like to talk to you about this for the supply chain and with your organization and the folks you represent who are literally lifting and moving the items through the food chain. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you're doing?
Sure. Before I start, let me say it's a pleasure to be here with the Department of Justice, Department of Agriculture. I'm really happy to see Hauter here from the Federal Trade Commission. From the onset, we thought it was very important to have the FTC in this process. We're really happy you're here and to follow up on what Secretary Vilsack said this morning. This may be the last hearing, but it's definitely not the last chapter. So let's make sure we push this going forward. Also, I just want to thank Brother Lieberman down there for a great opening for me. In that, I probably have a long list of retail grocery employers, suppliers, and others, probably 2 reams of paper of people that would not agree that competition is thriving and that everything is better good on the ground in communities. Because we've talked about the elephant in the room. Let's really talk about the elephant in the room. Walmart. As Howard said, the top 20 companies make up $725 billion in sales. Let's look at Walmart. they comprise $150 billion of those sales. So when you talk about their size, let's really talk about their size. Their percent of the grocery industry went from 6% in 1990 to 23% in 2009. If you look at if you look at the top 5 U.S. companies, Walmart makes twice as much as their closest competition, which is Kroger, as Hauter pointed out. But they make more than Costco, Home Depot, Target, CVS combined. So really, they're not, when we talk about consolidation, when we talk about the Krogers and Safeways, they're not the ones wielding the power. Walmart's wielding the power. Talk to any supplier, probably off the record and one-on-one in the closet, but they will tell you that it's not been a fun ride. The best example is one that's familiar to everyone in this room, which is Vlasic Pickle. Vlasic Pickle, many suppliers find themselves in the same situation. They go to Walmart, they're really happy to get the contract with Walmart, but they don't know what's happening until they really get in and they become dependent. It's like a drug. They're dependent, they're set, they hire based on this business, and then Walmart dictates the price. In the example of Vlasic Pickle, Walmart said we will pay you $2.97 for a gallon of pickles. So for a short period of time, it looked like great business until their other sales in sliced pickles, cut pickles started to decline. And so Vlasic went to their biggest contract and said, look, we need a little help here. We need you to raise the price on these items, and or else let us cut the cost of this gallon product from the $2.97. So Walmart refused and basically said, if you try to change the price, we won't sell any of your products. That's bully tactics. That's not how the supply chain should work. That's when the FTC stand in here, come here, and ensure that there's fairness in the supply chain. Farmers are not getting enough of this pie. If you look at what farmers got in 1990, they got 59% of the consumer beef dollar. If you look at what they got in 2009, it was 42%. If you go back to these communities where the Vlasics exist, Vlasic has to go back to a workforce and say, we no longer have jobs. The only way we can compete now that we've lost our biggest customer is to cut jobs, cut labor costs. And if you don't think that reverberates into the community, then we're all kidding ourselves. So really, the question here is, as we look at the supply chain, is we've had a kind of a missing link. We've had no oversight of the retail grocery sector. But with that said, let's put a little asterisk on that, because we're really just talking about Walmart. They're the only ones who control the process. They control the biggest employer in the United States, the biggest private sector employer, and they're dictating to suppliers, to farmers, to everyone down the chain. It is the #1 issue that we hear at the bargaining table negotiations from these supposedly thriving competitors. They don't look at it that way. So if I say anything here today, it's that the FTC has to remain a true partner in this process. We can't let this be the final stop in terms of bringing equality and fairness into this process. And unfortunately, I have example after example of suppliers that have just been totally cut out of this process. So let's one last note, just to give you one more piece of information about how big Walmart is. Walmart has a 30% market share in 168 markets across the country. In 29 markets, they have 50% market share. And probably the best resource to talk about how we should handle that is former Walmart CEO Lee Scott himself, who said that any company that has over 30% market share should surely have oversight and investigation by the government. So I'll use Walmart's own CEO's words in saying it's time for us to have action, because everybody else we talk about, it's not a waste of time, but we're not talking about the real issue. We're not talking about the power that Walmart wields in this arena.
Help us at the Department of Justice Antitrust Division, Bert. You're with the Antitrust Institute. We've heard a lot of talk about concentration of power and its impact on the supply chain. Help us frame it from the antitrust perspective, if you could.
Let me elaborate on what Kyle and Mary said about broadening the concept about consumer welfare. When we put this into context, antitrust has focused over the years mostly on seller power. Concentrated buyer power is relatively new, and we have not put the resources into a full understanding of its impact or how it relates to an entire supply chain, a whole system. Antitrust tends to focus on narrowly defined product and geographic markets, and does not take a sufficiently systemic view. Let me say that. Now, the one thing that comes out of that, I think, is we looked at monopoly as a model, and then we come to monopsony, which is the buyer concentration, and we try to live from the monopoly model. We say it's a mirror image. It's not really a mirror image for a number of reasons. One is that the level of market share necessary to have disproportionate bargaining power at the buyer side is much smaller than at the seller side. For monopoly, we talk in terms of 60, 70% of the market or more. You don't find that among buyers typically. But when a buyer has 20% of the national market, it's got life and death ability with respect to the suppliers. So a couple of conceptual problems come up. One is Hauter mentioned, which is you might exercise buyer power in such a way that it knocks down prices to the consumer at the end of the day. And maybe that's good. But if that's all you look at, maybe it's not so good. On top of that, maybe it won't get passed on to consumers. Maybe the power buyer has so much market power on a horizontal level, at the retail level, it has no need to pass it on. But let's leave that aside for the moment and talk about another difference. With consumer welfare focusing on the reduction of output. That's what we've been focused on for 30, 40 years primarily. Because if you have concentration and you reduce the amount of goods being produced, the price will go up. We've always got that properly. But when we talk about buyer power, the buyer, especially if it's a Walmart, which we take as the icon of buyer power, has the ability to offer an all or nothing arrangement. And if it's nothing, the supplier is out cold and probably can't survive. So what the buyer has is an inordinate amount of power. Mary's right. We've got to be looking at power. We've got to look at the negotiating realities that occur in the marketplace, and not simply what the effect on the consumer price is going to be. That's important. It's not the only thing of importance. So I think there may be really a third category we should look at: monopoly, monopsony, and disproportionate bargaining power. What we do about that, maybe I'll save for another time. But I do want to raise another point here, and that's something called the waterbed effect. It's not necessarily something that all economists agree happens, but let me explain it because I think it's logically sensible. Let's again take Walmart as an example. If Walmart can batter down its supplier and get a lower price, a discriminatorily low price, as compared to its horizontal competitors, the other retailers, then number one, it gains a competitive advantage because it's got lower cost. It can choose to pass that on to consumers at lower prices, or it can keep it as additional profit, in which case it's got more ability to expand and do other things. The other side of that is, what happens to the other retailers? If I'm a supplier and I've got to earn a certain return on investment, a certain profit level, and as a supplier, I have to give Walmart this low price that I'm giving to my other customers. I have to find some way to maintain my profit margin. which could be to raise prices, at least relatively, to the other people I sell to. Now, that's not an easy thing to do, and you may get away with it partially, you may not get away with it, but you're put in that position. So I'm saying that this idea of disproportionate buyer power can lead to a double win, where the big buyer benefits from the lower price that it gets, and at the same time, probably, I think, and this is worth a lot of study, raises the rival's costs at the horizontal level. It's a double whammy, and what it leads to is an ever-increasing behemoth.
Well, since we're talking antitrust and delving into antitrust economics, Howard, can I ask you to respond to the issues that first? We all struggle with